Welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is The 7 Years' War, Part 1. And we're going to talk about 5 terms that, as you read more about the topic, as you get into it, it's good to kind of start with these as a sense to, get a feeling for things. So let's dig into it. The first term is Albany Plan of Union. So mid-1700s, the colonies are going through a lot. And you've got demographics changing, you've got populations increasing, you've got questions of territorial expansion, issues with indigenous communities, but you also have other European colonial powers in the Americas who are looking at the region going, we want this and we want that. And one of the things that you have is French forces, both from New France, looking southward, to the south and places near Louisiana, looking northward, and setting up fortresses and beginning to feel they're going to have a claim here. And so one of the things that you're going to see during this time period is you're going to see a number of colonial sort of influential folks and diplomats and others come together at Albany and propose this plan for a form of an intercolonial legislature in 1754, where the idea was that you would be able to more rapidly respond if there was going to be some type of diplomatic issue or something. Now, the plan is famous because of a couple of things, right? So one is that it doesn't happen, but two, it's kind of foreshadowing for maybe the revolution a bit and, kind of self-rule and independent government and that kind of thing. And third, of course, you got folks like Ben Franklin who are attached to it. Second, General Braddock. So General Edward Braddock is going to be a key figure in the first year or so of the conflict. So you have these sort of doubly named conflicts, right? You've got the French and Indian War and the 7 Years' War. The French and Indian War supposedly begins in 1754. 7 Years' War is this big global conflict, begins 1756, but the two are linked, and 1754 is really where all this gets going in the Americas. And Braddock shows up as kind of the commander of British forces in 1755. And he's supposed to take control of what's called the Duquesne Expedition in the summer of 1755, and he does, but he's actually shot and killed. And it's George Washington who kind of brings him off the battlefield and is there when he dies a few days later. And Braddock is kind of central for this because he certainly is a reflection of the kind of British officer corps at the time. The British struggled a bit with resources, kind of getting this thing started. Braddock goes out there, tries to rally folks. There's some controversy in terms of who, how does he get shot, who fired the bullet, that kind of thing. But Braddock dies in the summer of 1755, which brings us to our third term, George Washington. Now, Washington, of course, is most famous for being the commander of American forces during the Revolution and also for being the first president of the United States. The thing was, Washington in the early 1750s is a very young man who is a part of the Virginia militia, who is basically a colonel or a lieutenant colonel. He's like 22, 23 years old. He's a very, very, very young man. And he finds himself sent out west near modern Hopwood and Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and gets involved in something called the Battle of Jumonville Glen, where he and his forces are going to attack a French contingent, and eventually, I believe, a diplomat is killed or something like that. And what happens with that diplomat being killed, Washington and his forces are going to eventually have to pull back. So this happens on the 28th of May, 1754. And what'll come is our fourth term, so Fort Necessity. So Washington and his forces are going to build this small wooden stockade fort to try to protect against French and Allied forces coming against them, and they're going to be overwhelmed. So Washington doesn't really pick the best location for this fort, kind of puts it right next to a tree line. The French kind of take advantage of this. He and his forces get surrounded. He eventually agrees to surrender. He has to march back and tell the Virginia governor, kind of what happens. This takes us to our fifth term, which is the War of Austrian Succession. So the War of Austrian Succession was a conflict between 1740 and 1748. It featured the French and the Prussians and others against the British and the Habsburg monarchy and other forces as well. And these wars of succession, which happened throughout the 1720s and 30s and 40s and 50s in Europe, really kind of set us up for some of the political machinations that would result in the 7 Years' War. So again, you've got the Albany Plan of Union, you've got General Braddock, you've got George Washington in the Battle of Jumonville Glen, you've got Fort Necessity, and you've got the War of Austrian Succession. Thank you very much.